So after my 3 years in the Middle East, I returned back to Marino, New York, back to the seminary, and I continued studying my theology. I started to feel something a little bit odd, but I didn't know what it was until it started to unfold a little bit later. So after that year of theology, I was sent to Rome, where I studied at the Pontifical Institute, and I was finishing my 3rd year of Arabic language studies. So while I was there, I was deeply influenced by the beautiful Italian architecture and the history of Italian art, particularly Michelangelo. He really struck me. And so I used to walk past all the fountains and buildings that he built that were spectacular. So my lessons learned there were mostly from Michelangelo. And one of the most beautiful things he said was to know each other is the best way to understand each other, and to understand each other is the only way to love each other. Now, I thought that was beautiful in so many different ways. Certainly me trying to understand and love and appreciate Islam and Muslims, and simply trying to understand humanity again. So this growth process continued, and it was influenced by many different people and experiences that I was still having. Now, after these studies, I was supposed to go back to the Middle East, but something was really wrong, and I didn't know what it was. So I returned back to Marino, New York, and that's when I began to recognize that I had been severely traumatized. But in light of our polyvagal theory that we teach in TRE, I didn't realize I was way up in the freeze response. I needed that to survive the traumas that I was experiencing in Beirut, but I was now starting to come from the freeze response back down. So my nervous system was starting to regulate itself back to normal. But in that process, as we know, I had to go through that post-traumatic stress cycle where I felt nothing or I was enraged. I felt alone and isolated, or I felt overwhelmed. And we know that. And I had to do that for about 2 years. I was going through counseling, trying to get through this process, which was really wonderful. And this is where I got introduced to bioenergetics. Alexander Lowen, who developed bioenergetics, he lived about a half hour away from me. So 3 days a week, I would go to his house and I would do bioenergetic exercises. I was familiar with the tremor mechanism. I loved it already. It was the first time I had seen it sort of applied in a positive way because I only had known it negatively while I was living in the Middle East. And I also applied to start doing bioenergetic training because it was so invaluable for me. So I was following the very principles that we teach in TRE, coming out of freeze, going into my body, using the tremor mechanism to deepen that so I could come back down to my baseline again. And I learned a lot doing bioenergetics about the body and about the trauma that was in my own body, and I had the amazing opportunity to use bioenergetic analysis to work that out. Going into my body was a powerful process for helping me to recover from the traumas that I had experienced. So I was reading a lot of Al's books. I read Depression and the Body, the biological basis of faith and reality. That really spoke to me. The Fear of Life, which is the wisdom of failure, that was powerful as well. And finally, I could read and accept Pleasure, a creative approach to life. One of the most powerful things I think that I really liked about Al Lowen was he was so committed to the body, trying to move us out of psyche, not to negate the psyche, but to move us out of it. And he's the one who said to me very clearly, said to all of us actually, see, the problem that we have is that the culture is not a body culture. And during this same time, I was finishing up my degree as a social worker as well in New York City. So now I had the spiritual experiences that I had, and then I was doing clinical social work, and I was doing body work through bioenergetic analysis. So somehow those three started to come together for me. And so then that took me on my next journey, which led me to Western Samoa.